On November 1st, 1922, a group of men sat in an assembly hall in Ankara and voted. There was no battle that day, no siege, no assassination, no burning palace, just a room full of representatives, a proposal read aloud, and a show of hands. By the end of that single session, an institution that had governed an empire for 623 years, through the rise and fall of Constantinople, through wars against nearly every major European power, simply stopped existing. The Sultan did not fight to keep his throne. Weeks later, he would leave the country entirely, quietly, aboard a British warship, never to return. 6 centuries of sultans ended in an afternoon. This is 1922, the year the Ottoman Sultanate was abolished, not in battle, but in a vote. By the end of this video, you will understand how one of history's longest-lasting dynasties came to an end without a final battle to mark its conclusion. You will learn about the catastrophic sequence of events, a world war, a foreign occupation, a war of independence, that made this vote not just possible, but in many ways inevitable. You will learn about the deliberate decision to separate 2 roles that had been combined in one man for centuries, the Sultan and the Caliph. You will learn what happened to the last Sultan personally in the weeks after the vote that ended his family's 6th century rule. 1922. The year an empire's oldest institution ended with a vote instead of a war. The Ottoman dynasty traces its founding to Osman I, a Turkish tribal leader in northwestern Anatolia around 1299, whose small principality grows over the following centuries into one of the largest and longest-lasting empires in human history. At its height, it spans 3 continents, ruling an extraordinarily diverse population. The Sultanate is not simply a political office, it is a continuous hereditary institution passed down through the same family line for over 6 centuries. By the early 20th century, the Sultan holds 2 roles simultaneously: secular political ruler and, since the 16th century, Caliph, recognized by many Muslims as symbolic successor to the Prophet Muhammad's political leadership. But by 1914, decades of territorial losses, internal instability, and economic dependency have left what contemporaries call the sick man of Europe. The Ottoman Empire enters the First World War allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary. It is a decision that will prove catastrophic. The empire's relationship with the European powers by this point is defined less by military rivalry than by financial dependency. Decades of debt, foreign loans, and concessions granted to European creditors have left the Ottoman treasury under significant external oversight, a humiliating arrangement for a state that had once been among Europe's most feared military powers. This financial subordination, combined with repeated territorial losses across the 19th and early 20th centuries, the loss of Greece, the erosion of Balkan territories, the surrender of North African provinces, has already, well before 1914, made clear to many observers both inside and outside the empire that its long-term survival in its existing form is genuinely uncertain. The Ottoman Empire's participation in the war ends in comprehensive defeat. By the Armistice of October 1918, the empire's leadership has effectively collapsed. Allied powers, Britain, France, Italy, and Greece, begin occupying significant Ottoman territory, including the capital, Constantinople, itself. The Treaty of Sèvres, signed in 1920 by the Sultan's government, formalizes what amounts to the dismemberment of the empire. Vast territories are stripped away. Independent Armenian and Kurdish regions are proposed within Ottoman Anatolia. Significant portions of Anatolia are earmarked for occupation by Greece, France, and Italy. For many Turks, the treaty represents an existential threat to any Turkish homeland at all. The Sultan's government, operating under Allied occupation, signs and attempts to implement this treaty, a decision that becomes central to the Sultanate's eventual downfall. Resistance begins forming, increasingly coalescing around a military commander who had distinguished himself during the war. Mustafa Kemal. Mustafa Kemal, moving to Anatolia in 1919, begins organizing a nationalist resistance movement opposed to both the occupation and the Sultan's cooperation with it. This movement establishes an alternative government, convening the Grand National Assembly of Turkey in April 1920, positioning itself as the genuine representative of the Turkish people in direct competition with the Sultan's government in occupied Constantinople. What follows is the Turkish War of Independence, fought between 1919 and 1922, primarily against Greek forces occupying western Anatolia and involving conflicts with French and Armenian forces elsewhere. Despite starting from severe disadvantage, the nationalist movement achieves increasingly decisive victories, culminating in the expulsion of Greek forces from Anatolia by September 1922. This success transforms the political situation entirely. The Ankara government, having defended Turkish territory where Constantinople had failed and, in nationalist eyes, collaborated with foreign powers, now possesses overwhelming legitimacy. The Sultan's government is widely viewed as thoroughly discredited. By late 1922, with the war effectively won, the question becomes unavoidable. What role remains for the Sultan when a separate government in Ankara has just won the war that determined the country's fate? It is worth emphasizing how remarkable this reversal actually is. Only a few years earlier, the nationalist movement had been a scattered, poorly equipped resistance, operating largely outside any formal governmental recognition, while the Sultan's government, however weakened, still possessed the outward trappings and international recognition of the legitimate Ottoman state. By 1922, that relationship has been completely inverted. The government that began the decade with formal legitimacy but no real power ends it with neither, while the movement that began with real conviction but no formal standing ends it holding both. The trigger is an invitation from the Allied powers to a peace conference at Lausanne, extended controversially to both the Sultan's government and the Ankara government separately, as though they were two equally legitimate Turkish governments. For Ankara, this is unacceptable. On November 1st, 1922, the Grand National Assembly votes to abolish the Sultanate, arguing that sovereignty had already passed to the nation and its elected representatives. A significant, deliberate detail is the distinction drawn between Sultanate and Caliphate. The vote abolishes the Sultan's political authority, but preserves for the moment the position of Caliph, separating a role combined in one person for 4 centuries into 2 theoretically distinct offices. This reflects careful calculation. Eliminating both dimensions simultaneously risks significant backlash, both domestically and across the wider Muslim world, where the caliphate still carries substantial symbolic weight. By preserving it temporarily, Ankara secures the essential political outcome, ending any competing claim to secular authority, while deferring the more sensitive religious question. That deferral does not last long. The caliphate itself is abolished less than 2 years later, in March 1924, as the new Turkish Republic consolidates its secular identity under Mustafa Kemal, who becomes known as Ataturk. The man holding the title at the moment of abolition is Mehmed VI, who ascended in 1918 during the final catastrophic year of Ottoman participation in the war. His brief reign is defined almost entirely by crisis. The war's collapse, the occupation of his own capital, and his government's controversial decision to sign the Treaty of Sèvres, permanently associating him with national humiliation in the eyes of the nationalist movement. Following the vote, his position becomes untenable. He faces significant hostility, and there is real concern he may face arrest if he remains. On November 17, 1922, just over 2 weeks after the vote, Mehmed VI leaves Constantinople aboard a British warship, requesting British protection. He eventually settles in San Remo, Italy, where he lives the remainder of his life in exile, dying in 1926, never returning to Turkey. His departure is undramatic. No final stand, no confrontation, simply a quiet early morning departure by sea, arranged with the same foreign power whose occupation had done so much to destroy his legitimacy. There is a particular historical irony in this final detail that contemporary observers did not fail to notice. The same British power whose wartime alliance system had contributed to the empire's collapse and whose occupying forces had done so much to delegitimize the Sultan's government in the eyes of the Turkish public, became the institution that ultimately carried the last Sultan safely away from the consequences of that collapse. Mehmed VI's final act as Sultan was not a defense of his throne, but an acceptance of exile arranged by the very foreign power his critics accused him of having served too faithfully. The abolition marks the end of considerably more than a single office. It represents the conclusion of one of the longest continuously operating hereditary dynasties in recorded history. 623 years of unbroken succession, spanning the medieval period through the modern era. It also represents the definitive end of an institutional model, the multi-ethnic, multi-religious imperial state governed by a hereditary Islamic monarch, in favor of the model the nationalist movement is actively constructing. A secular, nationally defined Turkish republic, formally proclaimed the following year, in 1923. The path from 1922 to the fully realized republic involves a rapid sequence of further changes. The formal proclamation in October 1923, the abolition of the Caliphate in March 1924, and sweeping legal and social reforms reshaping Turkish society along secular lines. None of this was strictly guaranteed by the November vote alone, but it functioned as the decisive first step, removing the final vestige of competing legitimacy and clearing the path for an entirely new political order. Here is what 1922 actually represents. It is tempting to imagine the end of a 6th-century dynasty requiring some dramatic final moment, a decisive battle, a violent overthrow. That is not what happened. The Sultanate did not end through conquest, as it had risen. It ended through a vote in an assembly hall, followed by a quiet departure by sea weeks later. This should not be mistaken for the ending being unimportant. The vote was the direct culmination of years of catastrophic defeat, foreign occupation, and a hard-fought war of independence that had already determined the outcome before the Assembly's representatives ever raised their hands. By the time the vote occurs, the Sultanate's authority has already been hollowed out by events on the ground. The vote formalizes a reality the war had already established. This is a pattern this channel has explored before. The dramatic moment historians attach to the ending of a great institution, the formal vote, the departing ship, the recorded date, is very often not the actual mechanism of its destruction. It is the final, almost administrative confirmation of a collapse that deeper forces had already made inevitable. 623 years of continuous dynastic rule ended not with cannon fire, but with a raised hand in a room in Ankara, the quiet conclusion to a story whose actual ending had already been written on the battlefields of the preceding war. 1922. The year 6 centuries of Ottoman sultans ended not in battle, but in a single assembly session. The formal conclusion to a collapse, a world war, a foreign occupation, and a war of independence had already made inevitable. The last sultan left his capital quietly aboard a foreign warship and never returned. The empire his family had ruled for over 600 years gave way to an entirely new kind of state, built from its ashes. If this story made you think, leave a comment. Do institutions more often end in dramatic final moments, or in quiet votes that simply confirm what has already been decided elsewhere? Subscribe to the Vault of Numbers. Every week, one number, one story history. Forgot to tell you, the next number in the vault. In 1204, soldiers marching under the same cross that united Christendom turned their weapons on a Christian city instead. The wound from that day never fully closed. The vault remains open.